BMW is known for making higher-end luxury automobiles that for over 50 years now have been promoted as the ultimate driving machine. A really good slogan to convey the brand's identity. These are regarded as some of the most luxurious cars on the market. The company is headquartered in Munich, Germany, the capital city of Bavaria, which is where the B in the name comes from. It is officially called Bayerische Motorenwerk, or translated to Bavarian Motor Works. Today, BMW ranks among the biggest automakers in the world, selling over 2 million vehicles globally each year, with a record 370,000 of them being sold in the United States. In many ways, they are looking stronger than ever, but it has been a bumpy road to get there. I'm talking about multiple times where the future of the company was in question, but impressively, they have always been able to correct course and recover. Truthfully, it is kind of amazing that they still exist today on this scale. So in this video, I want to outline some of the most significant rises and falls throughout their 100+ year history. Now, the structure of BMW in the early days can be very tricky to follow with different companies coming together to establish it, so I'm not going to confuse everything with all of that, but the ultimate cause behind its creation was World War I. Originally, BMW specialized in making engines for aircraft that were used by Germany during that war. You might expect that is where the propeller-looking logo comes from, but according to the company, that was just a big coincidence. The circle shape was taken from one of the previous companies that went into creating BMW, and the colors and pattern were taken from Bavaria's state flag. This initial version of the company, however, was short-lived, because only 3 years after officially being established, World War I ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. This right here had such a major impact on BMW, because the treaty essentially held Germany responsible for starting the war. It said that they had to reduce their military and that they could not produce aircraft anymore, which obviously is bad news for a company that specializes in aircraft engines. BMW was forced to shift their focus toward other engines, brakes for trains, and eventually vehicles. In 1923, BMW introduced its first motorcycle, the R32, that gained recognition a few years later when it was used to break the motorcycle speed record, traveling at 173.4 miles per hour. And that same year that the record was broken, in 1929, BMW introduced its first luxury car. All of this set the company in directions that would later help form its identity, but sadly, the true recovery of BMW during this time, if you want to call it that, was centered around World War II. Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, as a German manufacturing company in the 1930s and 40s, they were greatly affected by it. This is where the government got involved, because right when Hitler took control, BMW was forced to switch most of their manufacturing back to aircraft engines that were used by the country's Air Force. At their peak during this time, before the end of the war, BMW estimates that their workforce had grown to over 50,000 people, over half of which were being forced to work there. Typically, they were brought in as prisoners from concentration camps. Yeah, this is an extremely heavy topic that I do not want to explore much deeper in this video. So moving on from that, the next fall of BMW has multiple layers to it, but as you would expect, it started with the end of World War II. Following the war, the Allied forces took control of BMW's manufacturing plants for a few years, dismantled them, and yet again, they were forced to rebuild and reestablish themselves in new directions. Going into the 1950s, the R24 motorcycle was their best-selling product, making BMW primarily a motorcycle company that was having trouble establishing themselves in the car market. In 1952, they made their first post-war effort in that area with the 501, followed by similar models that were all very high-end, but not particularly profitable. They cost a lot of money to make and had trouble selling, partially because most of the German citizens could not afford the high price tag. Meanwhile, motorcycle sales were falling, so by the middle of the 1950s, BMW was in bad shape and believed to be headed toward bankruptcy unless something major came along to save them. Well, the thing that came along to save them was a sequence of successful cars, starting with maybe one of the most unlikely successes, the Isetta. This was a tiny three-wheel car originally produced by an Italian company that was more known for making refrigerators, and oddly enough, the Isetta opened up from the front with a single door, much like a refrigerator. BMW saw this car at an auto show, bought the rights to make it, added a fourth wheel, a modified motorcycle engine, and released it to the public within the year. We have to recognize that it is funny to think about how such a peculiar, inexpensive car was once so impactful to a company like BMW. Over the next 8 years, years, they sold over 160,000 of them, so not exactly a solution to their problems, but it bought them enough time to figure out a solution. In 1959, the BMW 700 was introduced as an inexpensive option that addressed a lot of the issues that people had with the Isetta, like how it was not nearly as small and the doors were actually on the sides of the car. Then, potentially even more impactful, in 1962, BMW introduced the 1500 model. This one was much more luxurious compared to the other two, and according to the company, this was the model that re-established BMW as a successful modern car maker. The demand for it was greater than the supply, and all three of these cars have been credited with rescuing BMW in their own way. I imagine without any one of them, the company would look much different today. They allowed BMW to survive through the tough time and set the company on a stable path without anything that I would consider to be a major stumble until the 1990s. Bringing me to the next fall on my list, the Rover acquisition. See, Rover was a British automaker that was actually owned by the British government before it was sold to this company British Aerospace in 1988. By 1994, when BMW bought it from them for over $1.2 billion, it seemed like it could be the perfect fit. BMW was mostly specialized in luxury cars, while Rover produced less luxurious cars and SUVs with the brand Land Rover. I mean, SUVs were really emerging at the time. The overall idea, the reasoning behind this deal was that BMW wanted to become bigger, and this was believed to be a quick and effective way to enter these new markets without diluting the prestigious BMW brand name. Well, the reality of it was not quite as smooth. In fact, this is generally believed to be one of the worst acquisitions within the auto industry. Part of the issue was that they potentially rushed into the deal. They wanted to remain competitive and avoid being acquired themselves by a competing company, so their desire to grow may have caused them to be more likely to accept or even overlook existing issues with Rover along the lines of outdated equipment and struggling reputations. Conversion rates involving the strength of the British pound may have played a factor, but probably the biggest single issue was failing to integrate the companies properly. BMW mostly let the management over at Rover do their own thing, and they failed to create a unified business plan where the two brands could potentially benefit from each other. By the end of the decade, Rover was losing over $1 billion each year, or to say that in a different way, BMW was losing around $3 million each day simply by owning this company. It got so bad that the German papers gave it the nickname the English Patient. Meanwhile, it was taking focus away from their existing BMW brand that was starting to lose market share in key markets around the world. It's difficult to express the extent of this because they were being harmed in numerous ways that may not be as straightforward. For example, right when the SUV market was exploding, BMW was holding off on releasing their first offering because they were afraid it would take focus away from the Land Rovers. So there were multiple layers to this, and almost none of it was good. The CEO of BMW that helped make that deal happen in the first place resigned from the company, and finally, in the year 2000, BMW essentially gave up on their plan. The Land Rover SUV brand was sold to Ford for $2.9 billion, and the rest of the company was sold to a group of British companies for the price of $15, along with the promise of a $700 million loan. To summarize here, BMW's involvement with Rover was poorly handled and may not have been the best idea in the first place. Going back to my list, the final rise of BMW has so many factors to it, but to keep it simple, I'm just going to call it diversifying. Kind of what they were trying to do before, right? But this is when BMW started expanding within different markets in what appears to be a much smarter way. Just going through different parts of it here, in 1999, they finally released the first BMW branded SUV that they technically promoted as a sports activity vehicle, SAV, and it sold very well. In 2001, they successfully relaunched the brand Mini, which had actually been acquired as part of the Rover deal and was just about the only part that they held on to from that. In 2003, they took control of the Rolls-Royce brand. That was big, and it fits in perfectly with their luxury image. The following year, in 2004, they introduced the 1 Series as a cheaper, less luxurious option, and in 2013 they released the i3 to start their line of electric vehicles that they say will make up 50% of all sales by 2030. I would say all of this proves that BMW has broadened their reach significantly over the past few decades, to a point where their sales have grown to almost 4 times higher compared to back then. All of this, by the way, while maintaining that higher end reputation of being the ultimate driving machine. I mean, that slogan has lasted so long for a reason. Let me me know in the comments, what do you think about BMW? Clearly some touchy, controversial stuff early on, but they seem to have mostly separated themselves from that period to where most people probably are not familiar with those stages in their history. But I have to say, it is still impressive that they were able to exist through all of it. I do not know of many companies that have survived for this long through this many changes and this many obstacles. Also, for anyone who has owned a BMW or has had access to one, what is your review of it? Would you say BMW is overhyped or overpriced, or do you think the quality of the product justifies what you pay for it? Finally, let me know what you think of my list of all these rises and falls. Toyota is a well-known manufacturer of automobiles, arguably the most successful company to ever do it. That is a bold statement, but in 2023, they sold 11.23 million vehicles around the world, and by that measure, they are the biggest. It has been kind of a back and forth battle between Toyota and Volkswagen for that #1 spot, but Toyota has been coming out ahead for the past few years. Also, the Toyota Corolla, I'm sure we're all at least familiar with it, considering it is the best-selling car of all time. It was introduced in the 1960s and has consistently been offered by Toyota in different generations ever since. In 2021, it became the first car to ever sell over 50 million units. These are all crazy numbers, by the way, that have clearly never been reached by anyone else. Around $300 billion in annual sales makes Toyota the 19th largest company in the world, with over 375,000 employees. I think it's impressive looking at how much they have been able to achieve over the years, especially when you factor in their humble beginnings and some major setbacks over the years. For this video, I want to focus on the foundation and growth of Toyota while highlighting 3 significant struggles that they've been able to overcome, because to use a driving metaphor, I find it inspirational to look back at the bumps along the road that they have had to pass to get to where they are today. The person responsible for starting Toyota was Kiichiro Toyota, spelled with a D, all the way back in the 1930s. See, his father was heavily involved in the Japanese textile industry. He had recently invented the automatic loom and established his own company to capitalize on it. Kiichiro started an automotive segment originally as part of his father's company, with the Model AA sedan being the first car that they produced in 1936. Shortly after, the Toyota Motor Company was established. You'll notice, now spelled with the more familiar T instead of the D, and the reason that they changed it isn't incredibly clear. To my understanding, the number 8 is considered really lucky in Chinese culture, and Japanese culture as well to an extent, and altering the spelling made it so that when you write it in Japanese, it takes 8 strokes to do it instead of 10. That is the main reason that they provide, and to me, that sounds like a wild reason to change the name of your company. They also say that the new name sounded more appealing, likely to an international market, so I'm going to guess that that was a bigger factor in the decision. Either way, I hope we can all agree that starting a car company in 1930s Japan was not the ideal time or place, being right before the start of World War II. It had such a negative impact on Toyota that it is going to be the first major setback on my list. Things got really serious. During the war, practically all production was dedicated to the war effort. Toyota stopped making consumer cars altogether in favor of making trucks for the military, but materials were scarce, so most of these trucks were not the highest quality. Some were made with wooden seats or maybe one headlight in the middle. Toward the end of it, they were salvaging parts from old trucks and reusing them to build the new trucks. And then when the war ended, things got even worse. The scarcity of supplies continued. Meanwhile, the Japanese economy was in poor condition, to say the least. A lot of people there could hardly afford to buy food, so they certainly weren't buying cars. And since government policies put in place to fight inflation made it difficult to secure loans, there was very little money coming in. They couldn't afford to pay their employees properly, so they went on strike, which caused production to drop significantly, worsening the situation. Founder and president Kiichiro Toyota then resigned from the company and ended up passing away from an unrelated brain hemorrhage only 2 years later. I know I'm a little scattered trying to explain the situation here, but things were chaotic at the time. In short, the Japanese economy following World War II put Toyota on the verge of bankruptcy, and it's almost a miracle that they survived it at all. They ultimately worked things out with the labor unions in an agreement that involved a 25% reduction in their their workforce, they secured a loan with one of the terms being that the sales division would be separated into its own company, where it remained for over 30 years. But the biggest part of the comeback, I would say, was the Korean War. Japan is close to Korea, so early in the war, the US military ordered almost 4,700 trucks from Toyota, and that was the spark that was used to reignite the business. It's kind of strange to think that World War II sent them down into a tailspin, whereas the Korean War helped put them back on course. It's hard to predict how these bigger events can affect companies like this, especially considering that Toyota cars had never been available in the United States at this point. And that is going to lead me straight into the second setback on my list, entering the US market. Obviously, the United States is a large country with millions of drivers, and in the 1950s, with all the new roads being constructed and people buying cars for the first time, it was a very attractive market for an automaker. To be perfectly clear, Toyota has always been a Japanese company that has had a strong connection to the United States. Before they ever even made their first car, Toyota went to the US to visit a bunch of production plants to better learn how the cars were being made in the country. A similar thing happened in the 1950s, where the management team from Toyota flew to the US to visit production plants so they can learn how to make their operations more efficient. So, in 1958, with high hopes and large ambitions, Toyota started selling cars in the United States, with the first one being the Toyopet Crown, and it was a total disaster. The car was not considered to be especially quiet or reliable, or honestly even built for the US market. It topped out at 75 miles per hour, so most consumers viewed it as not being powerful enough, too expensive, and even the name Toyopet did not go over well. It was sold in the country for only 4 years before being discontinued, selling less than 3,000 units over that time. For comparison, the leading brands were selling over 1 million each year, so any way you look at it, this was underwhelming and not a promising entry into the US market. However, they came back strong. In 1965, with their first car to become popular in America, the Toyota Corona.
More of what you want in a new car. A 90 horsepower engine goes 0 to 60 in 16 seconds.
They dropped the Toyopet name, gave it a more powerful engine capable of speeds much higher than 75 miles per hour, and overall, it was tailor-made for the American market, and the sales reflected that. In the 1970s, Toyota passed Volkswagen to become the most imported car brand in the US, and became widely recognized for their new slogan, "You asked for it, you got it." In the 1980s, they started manufacturing cars in the US for the first time, initially under a joint venture with General Motors, America's largest car maker, but then opened their own production facilities as well. In 1989, they introduced a new luxury brand called Lexus that took a little more than a decade to become the best-selling luxury brand in the country. That was also the year that they introduced that familiar logo that we all know, partially to differentiate it from the Lexus cars, but mostly to establish a more uniform global identity. They even say that the outer circle is meant to represent their global reach. And I don't even think I have to mention the Prius hybrid vehicle. I think we all know how popular that became, the Scion, and the Camry that consistently ranks as America's best-selling car. In 2021, Toyota sold more cars in the US than General Motors, marking the first time that GM wasn't the country's top-selling car maker in 90 years. Now, they have since lost that title, but the US continues to be Toyota's biggest market. Compare that to those 1950s numbers, and we can visualize how far that they have come. They are now beating US companies in their own territory, and that is crazy to think about. The final setback that I want to talk about is a little more general, but I'm going to put a few different events under the category of recalls. Just to be clear, compared to the other two on my list, these occurred much later, when Toyota was much more established in Japan and the US and the rest of the world, so none of it has realistically threatened the company's existence. But I think these are still significant because they have been a threat to their leading position, their finances, their reputation, and the safety of the drivers. In 2009, there was a huge controversy when they recalled millions of cars because of dangerous floor mats. I know that almost sounds like a joke, but they would cause the accelerator to get stuck, and that is a dangerous situation that potentially led to the deaths of as many as 89 people. There is so much that could be said about this, but Toyota paid over $1 billion to settle a class action lawsuit involving the situation, and over $1 billion in criminal penalties to the US government, the largest criminal penalty ever imposed on a car company in the US. Once again, the timing of all of this was awful. It was during the recession when car sales were already struggling, leading to some unusually poor sales figures, and the following year, Japan was hit by an earthquake and a tsunami that affected their supply chain and significantly impacted production. So for reasons within their control and beyond their control, that was an unsettling time for Toyota. In 2014, it was announced that Toyota was one of many car companies impacted by faulty airbags provided by their supplier. Again, it was a harmful mistake where multiple deaths have led to troubling recalls that they are still dealing with. There are still plenty of Toyota cars on the road with dangerous airbags. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration called that one the largest and most complex safety recall in US history. In 2016, not exactly a recall, but Toyota agreed to pay more than $3 billion to settle a class action lawsuit involving truck owners who say that their vehicles did not receive adequate rust protection, and that has compromised the integrity of the frames. They didn't admit to any wrongdoing, but again, not a great situation. As recent as 2024, two Toyota companies have been in the spotlight for negative reasons. One involving irregularities in certification tests for diesel engines, and the other for forging results of safety tests, I guess for more than 30 years. It caused the head of the company to issue an apology, and you could see how high-profile incidents like these can make people look at Toyota differently and question whether or not it would be a smart or even safe decision to buy a vehicle from them. You have to admit, they have had a fair amount of bad publicity over the past 15 years and have been amazingly unimpacted by it. During that time, they have grown into the world's largest car maker, and it's yet another example of Toyota overcoming a potentially harmful situation. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Toyota as a company and as a car brand? Are you impressed by their ability to rise above their problems in the same way that I am, taking over the Japanese auto market and then the US auto market and somehow holding on to all of it despite so much negative attention? Do you own a Toyota, and if so, are you happy with it, and what influenced your decision to buy